Hello everybody, I hope your day is going great and it's about to get better. Today, if you spell poorly, this is ABC, all about chard. I'm going to show you the basics of growing one of the most beautiful veggies in the garden. Stay tuned.
I'm Stace. For me, healthy food and sustainability are totally connected. You can grow it yourself. Nature is generous.
Chard, or as it's often called, Swiss chard, is an absolutely incredible veggie. So colorful and beautiful. This is a variety of chard called Bright Lights, which is known for having one of two types of color profiles. This one's got the bright red down the middle, and then there's also on Bright Lights varieties some bright orangey yellow down the middle, but this is the red one. So like all gorgeous veggies, it starts out as a seed, and I just wanted to show you the seeds of a chard plant. There's about 8 or 10 seeds on my palm, and if you're familiar with seeds in the garden, you probably know that these are very similar to another type of seed. They look just like beets. Now you know the Latin taxonomical name for chard or Swiss chard is Cicla, C-I-C-L-A, and that actually means beet-like, which is why when you look at a young beet plant growing up and a young chard plant growing up side by side, they look identical until you look below the ground and the maturity starts to happen, and you see the beet is going to develop a root, whereas the chard won't have nearly as much of a root. It'll be all about eating what's above the ground. And just like beets, you can eat the greens of a beet leaf fresh or cooked when they're young and tender. Chard is wonderful to eat fresh, not cooked, when it's young and tender especially, and then usually as it gets a little older and the leaves size up like this, a little more mature, probably better to look at cooking it. So we're going to look today at starting the seeds either in a little pot or sowing them directly into the ground in your garden when it's warm enough, and then transplanting and growing it up for your family so you can enjoy it in your kitchen, and some thoughts about growing it through the season if you're in a warm enough growing zone, and then also saving the seeds as well so that you can keep on using the seeds from last year's plants to grow and grow and grow. So let's get into it. Chard is an absolutely fascinating plant to watch in the garden. Now, first of all, you need to realize it has a biennial life cycle, so it's designed to live in 2-year cycles. Most people get to see a lot of plants in their garden only in the first year, unless you wait for overwintering, and then the magic of the second year happens in the biennial life cycle. So in the first year of chard's life, it grows leaves for you and I to eat. And then after it's overwintered, finishing its first year, it comes into year 2, and it grows seeds for us to save and collect because it wants to make babies. So this is a beautiful example of a plant that's kind of moving across the boundary from year 1 to year 2. You can still find little leaves on the plant like this to grow, but it's putting most of its energy no longer into leaves. There's the little leaves. It's starting to grow these little stalks here, and these stalks have less and less leaves on them now, and they're starting to form tiny little seeds. Now these seeds on this plant are by no means ready to harvest. This whole stalk has to dry out and get brown and brittle, and the seeds in the process will use up the energy in the plant's root system, and they'll start to size up like the seeds I've already shown you. And when the whole stalk is brown and brittle and the seeds are fully formed and dry, then they'd be ready to save and collect, and that can be planted the next year. So beautiful. That's how the biennial life cycle works on chard. Now I'll just take it and show you right here another variety of chard growing in the garden, and this is Ford Hook. I showed you Bright Lights already. The one that's got this white stem down the middle like marrow on a bone, that's Ford Hook. Now the beautiful other thing to know about chard is that every single size of leaf is suitable to eat. And so you can have a tiny little plant just starting out. As long as you don't take all of its leaves, its solar panels off, and you just take a few of them, you'll be able to eat very young, fresh, tender chard leaves. You get great big leaves like this. They're also still totally edible. Today I was making a lasagna for like 8 people in the kitchen, and as I made the tomato sauce, I came to my garden, I picked a whole bunch of large chard leaves like this. I chopped off from the center of the stem, so I took out that harder, more tough stem, and I chopped this all up and cooked it in with the sauce, and then using an immersion hand blender in the pot, I blended up all the chard that had cooked in with the tomato sauce ingredients, and so my kids are getting their veggies tonight with their lasagna, whether they know it or not. Don't you love volunteers? Not just in the people world where they jump in and do more than they're asked of without being paid. Same in the plant world. These are all a whole bunch of volunteers in this garden bed. There's a volunteer going to seed onion. There's volunteer kale here. And for the sake of today's ABC video, there's a volunteer of chard, a giant Ford Hook chard plant that I did not plant. It grew up voluntarily. So yay for the volunteers. You might not even have to plant your own. You'll just end up growing your own because of the volunteers from the ones that went to seed from last year. Okay, I'm next to a very tall year 2 Bright Lights chard plant. Early in the spring, you can see I tied a little pink flag on here to remind myself not to harvest too many of its leaves because I wanted all of its energy to go into seeds. And now it's well over 6 feet tall, and I'll just bring in close some of the seeds so you can see how they're starting to mature, but it's still not a brittle or brown stalk. The seeds are still going to need probably another month or 6 weeks to really mature till I can save them. At that point, I'll probably put them in a big brown paper bag and shake the bag around, and all the really ripe, large, well-formed, mature seeds will fall in the bag, and I'll just label it with a Sharpie marker what it is inside that bag and what year I saved it, and my seed is saved. But there is a question you might have, and it's a good one, and it's about pollination and how cross-pollination might happen, because you know that if a plant cross-pollinates with a different type of plant, it might have a strange hybrid that doesn't really produce good food the next year. And so this big chard plant has growing right next to it some curly green kale that I'm saving the seed of, and there's actually some garlic scapes right here that I missed snipping off as well. And you might be asking yourself, is it going to cross-pollinate with the garlic? No, it can't. Is it going to cross-pollinate with the curly kale? It can't do that either because they're in different families. But this is a plant actually that's not pollinated by insects. It's pollinated by the pollen on it blowing off in the wind and hitting another chard plant. And so the swirling around of the pollen is what creates the pollination. And there is one plant that the chard will cross-pollinate with in the garden. If you get that cross-pollination, you'll get a weird little family member, and it's when it cross-pollinates with beets. Because remember, chard's true name is beet-like, and it'll cross-pollinate with a beet. So you got to make sure your beet's going to seed and your chard going to seed are in different areas of your property, or else you're going to get some weird hybrid chard beet babies. Now let's get on to looking at those little baby seeds and getting them growing in a pot, okay? Chard is amazingly easy to grow, and I just want to talk to you briefly about planting it from seed. Now in the garden, when it starts warming up, where I live, it's zone 8, west coast of Canada, my overnight frost usually ends at the end of April or early May, and around that time, I'll just dig a little trench in the garden, just an inch deep, a couple centimeters deep, and I'll grab my little jar of seeds, and I'll start putting seeds in the soil, and I space them out this far apart, and then as they come up, and not everyone will, I'll thin them out a little bit and get them about a hand span apart so that the plants have some space to grow, and I'll plant them on opposite sides of a drip irrigation line, staggered like that, and they'll come up, and I'll have all the space in between the rows covered with coffee sacks and cardboard so that there's no weeds and lots of moisture being held into the soil. But let's say you want to start your plants first of all in a little pot, which is a great idea. Please use a 4-inch pot. It's a perfect size to get little things like chard going, and I would get a pot like this about 2/3 full with soil right to there. Then I'd usually take 2 little seeds and I'd put them in opposite edges, not right to the corners, diagonally in here, so that if one of the seeds doesn't germinate, at least one will, and it'll be a success, and it's not a bad thing for 2 to come up together. Then I'd give it a little sprinkle of water from the watering can, and when it's moist, then I'd cover it up again. Now you know water's definitely right on the seed. At that point, I'd just give it a little gentle, give it another little water, and that's ready to go. Now remember, for seeds to germinate, they don't need light. In fact, if you leave this exposed and it's warm out, it could dry out from the wind and the sun. I usually get a whole tray full of these little pots going. I cover it with cardboard or a piece of plywood. I only have to water them once a week, and in 1 week it'll all have germinated, and then you can let it grow and the solar panels will come out, those little leaves, and start needing the light and growing beautifully. When do you start planting it into the garden? I'd say when it gets about this size. When it's got a couple leaves like this and it's ready to go, just dig a little hole in your garden near your irrigation or your drip line, a little deeper than this. Use a hand shovel or just your own hand, press it in gently, and then once you've got it in the ground, maybe a little sprinkle of bone meal so the roots get established. I don't usually ever fertilize my chard because it grows so well without any fertilizer, but if you want to know how to make organic fertilizer, I've got a little video about that. You can find that on my YouTube channel. And with that, you could do a little half handful of organic fertilizer around the roots of this little buddy, and it'll just get that much bigger and grow that much more vigorously. You probably only need about 2 or 3 chard plants per person who you're cooking for. So if you're a family of 4 or 5, you might need 8 or 10 plants depending on how hungry the kids are. That's all there is to it. Chard's really easy to grow, and it'll give you a lot of love for the few seeds you put in the ground. Yes, chard has so much to offer. It's full of all sorts of vitamins like A, C, E, and K. It's got lots of different minerals in it, especially packed full of iron. I have it almost every day through the year. I have it fresh when it's especially smaller leaves, along with kale in morning smoothies. I fry it up with things like garlic and onions to add to omelets. I put it into sandwiches like a grilled cheese sandwich, and using an immersion blender, I saute it and I blend it in with sauces that go into casseroles and pasta dishes and things like that. If you get it going in the spring, you can enjoy it all through the summer. If you get another crop of it growing in late summer, early fall, you can often enjoy it all through the fall and even into the winter if your climate's quite mild. And if you need a little bit of help getting it through the winter, look on my channel for a hoop house video, because you'll learn how to grow it under a hoop house and extend the growing season. Chard has so much to offer. It's truly wonderful. And hey guys, if you've been enjoying this video on YouTube, thanks a lot. Please subscribe to the channel. I'll keep on sending you more great resources. Have a good one.